Some stories were never meant to see the light of day. Projects so twisted, lost, or abandoned that even Disney tried to erase them. From nightmares hidden in animation cells to ideas too dark for theaters, we're diving into 7 levels of Disney media you've never seen and probably shouldn't. Stick around because the deeper we go, the darker it gets. Level 7 is something you would never expect to come out of Disney. Level 1. Slightly off nostalgia. The Rescuers. Disney has always been known for its attention to detail, from carefully painted backgrounds to the smallest movement of a character's face. The studio prided itself on perfection. Yet, perfection is a strange word when applied to a company made up of hundreds of people working under strict deadlines. Mistakes happen, sometimes small and sometimes intentional. One of the most famous examples comes from the 1977 film The Rescuers. On the surface, it is a charming adventure between 2 little mice, Bernard and Bianca, who set out to save a kidnapped girl. But hidden within the frames of this film lies something that is neither charming nor family-friendly. The story first surfaced in 1999 when Disney released The Rescuers on home video. During one particular scene, sharp-eyed viewers noticed something odd in the background. As the mice travel through the city on the back of an albatross, they pass a window. For a fraction of a second, inside that window is a very clear image of a topless woman. It is not stylized, not cartoonish, and not in keeping with the artistic tone of the movie. It is a real photographic image spliced into the animation. Viewers were shocked. This was not some blurry shape that could be debated. It was unmistakable. Disney quickly recalled millions of VHS copies once the discovery was made public. The company claimed that the image had been inserted during the post-production process and insisted that the original animators were not responsible. This explanation only added to the mystery. If not the animators, then who? Was it an act of sabotage by someone within the studio? A prank that went unnoticed for decades? Or was it simply the result of careless editing at a time when films were handled on physical reels? It is also worth remembering that this was not the only time something like this happened. Disney films and products have long been rumored to contain hidden adult jokes or subliminal images.
So you two are absolutely identical? You know, I'm sure I could get you a part in Toy Story 3. I'm sorry, are we back? Oh, all right, girls. Lovely talking with you.
Some are clearly intentional jokes by animators, like background gags in The Lion King or Aladdin. Others may be accidents blown out of proportion by rumor, but the Rescuers case was undeniable. Disney itself admitted the image existed and went to the trouble of recalling and correcting the release. The human element is also important here. Disney animators, despite the myth of wholesome perfection, were artists working long hours under pressure. In the 1970s especially, the studio was going through a rough patch. The old masters like Walt Disney were gone, and the new generation was struggling to keep the magic alive. Morale was low, and the studio often felt like it was slipping behind in a changing entertainment world. In such an environment, it is easy to imagine small acts of rebellion or mischief creeping into the work. Whether intentional or accidental, the topless image in The Rescuers becomes a strange reflection of the times. Level 2. Forgotten Creepy Shorts. Pluto's Judgment Day. This one is not a hidden frame or mischievous detail. It's an entire short cartoon, officially produced and released by Disney, that somehow manages to feel unlike almost anything else the studio ever created. The short in question is Pluto's Judgment Day, released in 1935. On the surface, it stars Pluto, Mickey's loyal dog, who at that time was becoming a character with his own personality and shorts. Most Pluto cartoons revolve around everyday antics, chasing cats, barking at squirrels, or getting into slapstick mischief. But this short goes somewhere else entirely. Instead of a funny slice of life, it presents Pluto being dragged into a surreal nightmare where he is put on trial for his sins. The cartoon begins innocently enough. Pluto is chasing a kitten as he often does, growling and causing trouble. Mickey scolds him gently, but soon after, Pluto dozes off. And this is where the short begins to change tone. In his dream, Pluto finds himself confronted by a group of ghostly cats who whisk him away to a fiery underworld. Suddenly, the cheerful world of Disney transforms into something far closer to a gothic horror piece. Pluto is forced into a courtroom where he is placed on trial for crimes against cats. The judge, the jury, the prosecutor, all of them are cats, glaring down at him with fury. The cats appear in exaggerated, grotesque designs, much darker than the usual Disney style of the time. Their movements are sharp, their faces filled with malice. The trial is less about justice and more about torment. Evidence is presented. Pluto's past acts of cruelty towards cats are replayed, and the jury laughs with mocking cruelty. The trial quickly becomes a nightmare of punishment. The cats torture Pluto, dragging him through fiery pits, threatening him with execution, surrounding him in overwhelming numbers. The imagery is quite intense. Flames, shadows, claws reaching out, Pluto howling in terror. Finally, just as Pluto seems doomed, he wakes up. The nightmare ends, and he finds the kitten he chased earlier. Shaken by his dream, he changes his behavior and decides to be kind instead of cruel. The cartoon ends with a moral: be good or else you face consequences. On paper, this sounds like a standard morality tale, but the way it is presented leaves many modern viewers unsettled. It's not a light-hearted lesson like many Disney shorts deliver. Instead, it feels more like a descent into a moral hellscape. The timing of this short is important. The 1930s were a strange period for Disney. The studio was experimenting with tone, pushing the limits of what cartoons could do. Animation was still a young medium, and there was no strict formula yet for what a Disney cartoon should feel like. Some shorts were silly, others were artistic, and some, like Pluto's Judgment Day, were almost experimental. This particular short reflects influences from silent horror films and from early animation traditions that were darker and stranger than what Disney would later become known for. What makes this short fascinating is that it has been largely forgotten. Disney does not promote it on streaming platforms or bundle it with family collections. It exists and you can find it, but it's not placed on a pedestal with other classics. It is as if the company quietly buried it, recognizing that its tone no longer fits the brand. It feels less like a cartoon meant for children, and more like an artifact from an alternate version of Disney history where the company embraced surreal horror. Level 3. Lost Media. Mickey Mouse Pogrom. The third level drags us into far murkier territory. This is where facts and rumor blur, where we enter the world of lost media. A piece of film may have been created, spoken of, maybe even shown once or twice, but then it vanishes. It exists only in fragments, rumors, or secondhand accounts. And when the subject matter is deeply disturbing, those shadows grow darker the more you look. Among the rumors of Disney lost works, few stories are as chilling as the legend of Mickey Mouse Pogrom. This short cannot be found. Some researchers say it never existed. Others insist it was made, screened, then buried. What makes the story more interesting is the very fact that it involves Mickey Mouse himself, not some obscure character, but the corporate symbol, the embodiment of innocence, the face of the entire Disney empire. To place Mickey in a context of violence and ethnic hatred is almost unthinkable, and yet that is exactly what the rumors suggest. There's a story that in the 1930s, a Polish animator named Jan Jarosz, who had an extreme aversion to Disney and hated the character Mickey Mouse, created a short film called Mickey Mouse Pogrom in an attempt to publicly shame Disney before the war. The cartoon, according to those who claim it existed, is an unofficial Polish short from the 1930s in which Mickey Mouse is captured, humiliated, tortured, and ultimately killed by local figures portrayed as Polish in an attempt to get Mickey off their native land. This item appears repeatedly in online lost media lists and discussion threads, but it is not an authenticated film in any museum or archive. The short was never completed and published to the public, possibly due to it being deemed as scary and disturbing to kids. Only a photo and information can be found in a book called Mickey I Mitzi, a book about pre-war animation. It is unknown if the short will likely surface to the public. The 1930s in Europe were politically turbulent. Satire, political cartoons, and anti-American cultural work did appear in many countries. A plausible explanation for an anti-Mickey piece is that some artists use a globally recognized American symbol to make a pointed local comment. That idea explains why someone would use Mickey as a target. But it also raises the possibility that the film was never meant as mere cruelty. It might have been political provocation, satire, or propaganda. Some suggest that foreign propaganda may have used Mickey's image without authorization, creating disturbing cartoons that falsely appear to be Disney's work. In the 1930s and 40s, Mickey was an international figure and not always loved. Some countries saw him as American cultural invasion, and cartoons mocking him appeared overseas. A piece of anti-Semitic propaganda using Mickey's likeness could easily have been mistaken over time for a genuine Disney short. Without the actual film, we cannot know. We can only map plausible motives: revenge against cultural imperialism, shock satire, or an animator's personal grudge. The strangest part of the rumor is the claim that a single frame survived. Online people circulate an image said to be from the show, showing Mickey tied up and surrounded, a look of fear on his face. It is often posted with the caption, "The only surviving frame of Mickey Mouse Pogrom." But here's the problem. No one knows where it came from. It isn't catalogued in an archive. It isn't tied to any official book scan, and no one has proven that it really came from an old film reel. Despite that, the story refuses to die. Lost media forums, obscure blogs, and even fan wikis repeat it over and over, usually citing a Polish film history book that supposedly mentioned it. But every time researchers look deeper, they find the same problem. No reels, no production notes, no verified records. So what we're left with is this: a disturbing rumor about an anti-Mickey short from pre-war Poland, a mysterious animator's name, and a single frame that may or may not be real. Whether Mickey Mouse Pogrom ever existed is still unknown. But like many pieces of lost media, the mystery itself has taken on a life of its own. Level 4. Bizarre or unauthorized. Escape from Tomorrow. This is not a lost short or an old mistake from the 1930s. It is a modern piece of cinema created outside the studio's control. It is a work of rebellion made inside the very walls of the most carefully controlled place on Earth, Walt Disney World. The film is Escape from Tomorrow, and it remains one of the strangest unauthorized projects ever made. Released in 2013, Escape from Tomorrow tells the story of a middle-aged man named Jim who goes on a family vacation to Disney World. On the surface, it looks like an ordinary day at the park. He wakes up in his hotel room, joins his wife and children, and sets out for a day filled with rides and attraction. But almost immediately, things begin to spiral into nightmare. He sees disturbing visions, faces morphing into grotesque shapes, rides turning sinister, and bizarre conspiracies involving Disney princesses and park employees. The cheerful world of Disney slowly collapses around him into a fever dream of paranoia, lust, and despair. The most shocking aspect of this film is not its story, but the way it was made. Writer-director Randy Moore shot the entire film guerrilla style inside Disney parks without permission. He and his small crew entered the parks with handheld digital cameras, blending in with ordinary tourists. They filmed on rides, in hotel rooms, on main streets, even in Epcot and Tomorrowland. Every background, every smiling park employee, every castle turret you see in the movie is very real. It was filmed without Disney knowing. This is not a recreation. It is Disney's actual theme parks transformed into the setting of a disturbing psychological horror film. That very act, sneaking into Disney's controlled world to film something unauthorized, is what makes Escape from Tomorrow kind of iconic. He used the real Disney setting as a weapon, transforming it into a stage for nightmares. When the film premiered at Sundance in 2013, people were stunned. How could someone possibly film an entire feature inside Disney parks without the company suing immediately? Many assumed Disney would bury the film, shutting it down with lawsuits, but that never happened. Disney did nothing. The company refused to acknowledge the film at all. Some speculated that Disney realized suing will only draw more attention. Others believed the company knew the film was too strange and niche to threaten the brand. Whatever the reason, Disney allowed the film to exist. Because of that, Escape from Tomorrow remains accessible today, though it exists in a strange cultural limbo. It is not celebrated widely, nor is it included in mainstream discussions of Disney. Instead, it is passed around like an artifact. Level 5. Racist Cartoons. Mickey's Melodrama. This is not a rumor or legend. This is Disney's own creation, released to the public and embraced at the time, but which today exists as a reminder of racism woven into the history of animation. The cartoon is Mickey's melodrama, and it forces us to confront the fact that even the most beloved symbol of childhood innocence was once painted in blackface. Released in 1933, Mickey's Melodrama is a short cartoon where Mickey and his friends put on a theatrical play. The play they choose is based on Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe's famous 1952 novel that exposed the horrors of slavery. By the 20th century, Uncle Tom's Cabin had been turned into countless stage plays and adaptations, many of which distorted its original anti-slavery message into crude melodrama. These so-called Tom shows often became excuses for exaggerated performances filled with stereotypes, played for laughs or spectacle rather than serious commentary. Disney's short fits directly into this tradition. In Mickey's Melodrama, Mickey and the other characters dress up in costumes to play the roles from Uncle Tom's Cabin. The most disturbing part is how they prepare. Mickey is shown painting his face black to perform in blackface. Minnie and the others do the same, transforming themselves into crude caricatures of African Americans. Back then, it was presented as a comedy, but it definitely wouldn't pass today. The cartoon proceeds as a parody performance of the play. Mickey and his friends exaggerate their movements, speak in over-the-top dialects, and rely on offensive stereotypes for humor. The audience within the cartoon laughs and cheers, and the short treats the entire performance as light-hearted fun. Mickey Mouse is literally shown participating in one of the most demeaning racist traditions of American entertainment history. There is also something weird about the choice of Uncle Tom's Cabin as the basis of the short. The novel was originally meant to be a serious anti-slavery statement, a powerful work of moral urgency, but by the 1930s, it had been transformed into entertainment fodder, stripped of its seriousness and used for parody. The cartoon also highlights a broader issue: the history of racism in animation. To understand how this could happen, we have to step into the cultural climate of the 1930s. At that time, blackface minstrelsy was still common in American entertainment. It appeared in vaudeville shows, on stage, and in films. Audiences did not yet view it with the same awareness of racism that we do today. Cartoons from other studios also leaned heavily on racial caricatures and stereotypes. Disney was not alone in this, but that does not erase the fact that they participated. Disney is often singled out because of its cultural dominance, but every major animation studio of the era engaged in similar caricatures. Warner Bros. Produced shorts with grotesque depictions of African Americans and other minorities. Fleischer Studio did the same. Cartoons reflected the prejudices of society that created them, but the difference is that most of these characters faded with time. Mickey, however, remained and grew into a global icon. Mickey was already a beloved figure by 1933, though still rougher around the edges than the later polished version. He was marketed as America's favorite mouse, a symbol of optimism during the Great Depression. It becomes a reminder that racism was not just present in obscure corners of entertainment history, but was baked into the very foundations of some of the most beloved cartoons and studios. Disney, of course, does not promote this cartoon today. It is rarely seen outside of archives or academic discussion. Unlike other controversial works such as Song of the South, which Disney has actively locked away, Mickey's melodrama floats in a gray area. It is not available on official platforms, but it is not impossible to find if you look online. Level 6. Dark PG Disney. The Black Cauldron. By now, we have seen Disney's cracks in many forms: hidden mistakes, forgotten nightmares, legends of lost films, outsider sabotage, and shameful racism. But at the 6th level, the story shifts again. This time, the darkness did not come from a hidden prank or an unauthorized work. It came directly from Disney itself, in full theatrical release, aimed at children, and carrying a tone so grim that it shocked audiences and almost destroyed the studio. This was The Black Cauldron, the first Disney animated film to be rated PG, and for decades it was remembered as the darkest official Disney movie ever made. Released in 1985, The Black Cauldron was unlike anything Disney had attempted before. It was an adaptation of Lloyd Alexander's The Chronicle of Prydain, a fantasy series inspired by Welsh mythology. The source material was epic, serious, and filled with death and magic. Disney at the time was desperate to reinvent itself. The studio had been struggling creatively since Walt Disney's death in 1966. By the early 1980s, animated films like The Fox and the Hound had kept the studio afloat. But younger audiences were flocking to new, edgier entertainment. Rival studios like Don Bluth were gaining traction with films like The Secret of Nymph, which did not shy away from dark imagery. Disney wanted to prove it could be bold, serious, and relevant. On paper, The Black Cauldron was supposed to be Disney's answer to this problem. It had a larger budget than any animated film the studio had ever made at that time. It promised a sweeping fantasy epic, filled with magic, sword fights, and powerful villains. But when it finally hit theaters, what audiences saw was not the comforting magic of Disney. Instead, they saw something closer to horror. The story follows Taran, a young assistant pig keeper who dreams of being a great warrior. He learns that his pig, Henwen, has magical powers and must be protected from the evil Horned King, who seeks the Black Cauldron, a mythical object that can raise an army of undead soldiers. Along the way, Taran meets Princess Ilonwi, the bard Fleur-de-Flamme, and the strange creature Gurgi, who becomes his companion. Together, they face the Horned King and his terrifying forces. On the surface, this may sound like a standard fantasy adventure, but the tone of the film is much darker than the typical Disney fare. The landscapes are bleak and shadowy. The villains are grotesque, with skeletal figures and demonic designs. The Horned King himself is perhaps the most frightening Disney villain ever created. A skeletal figure cloaked in tattered robes, with glowing red eyes and a voice that sounds like death itself. His goal is not treasure or power in the usual cartoonish sense. It is the creation of an undead army, a horde of rotten corpses pulled from the Black Cauldron to march upon the living. The scenes depicting this are intense, especially for children. In one infamous sequence, the Horned King uses his cauldron to summon his cauldron-born army. Skeletons rise from their graves, decaying flesh clings to bones, and the undead march in creepy silence, accompanied by sinister music. For a film marketed to families, this imagery borders on horror cinema. Children of the 1980s who saw it in theaters often recall being terrified, some even leaving the theater in tears. Behind the scenes, the production of The Black Cauldron was a nightmare in itself. The film went through years of development hell, with directors, animators, and executives clashing over its tone and style. The studio poured enormous resources into the project, experimenting with new animation techniques, including the use of computer-generated imagery for certain sequences. But by the time it was finished, test audiences were horrified, not by poor quality, but by how frightening it was. Legend has it that children ran screaming from early screenings. Scenes of mutilation, graphic violence, and prolonged terror were deemed too extreme. As a result, Disney executives ordered major cuts. Nearly 12 minutes of footage were removed, including sequences where characters were melted and dissolved, where undead soldiers gruesomely attacked the living, and where the Horned King's death was even more terrifying. Much of this footage has never been restored. When The Black Cauldron finally premiered in 1985, it bombed at the box office. It was criticized for its uneven tone and its failure to capture the warmth of earlier Disney films. Audiences expecting another Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty were instead given a dark fantasy epic filled with corpses and despair. The film lost millions of dollars and nearly bankrupted the animation division. In fact, Disney's board of directors seriously considered shutting down animation altogether after its failure. If not for later hits like The Little Mermaid, The Black Cauldron might have been remembered as the end of Disney animation.
It was Disney's birthday. A couple of animators made a film of Mickey and Minnie fornicating and ran it, and everybody got a really good laugh out of it, and it was a very harmless bit of footage, at the end of which Disney stood up and said, that was great, that was fabulous animation. Who did that? And the animators who did raised their hands, and he fired them on the spot.
Here, we leave the realm of verifiable history and step into something stranger, the Mickey and Minnie Mouse tape. Unlike lost or forgotten films, this one has no verified existence, no archive listing, and no proven frames, and yet people still talk about it. The claim, in its simplest form, is that a group of disgruntled Disney animators, at some point in the company's long history, secretly produced an explicit short featuring Mickey and Minnie in sexual situations. Supposedly, the tape was never meant for public release. No hard evidence has ever emerged, no production notes, no still frames, no trustworthy eyewitnesses' accounts from people who could actually confirm they saw it. Disney itself has never acknowledged anything remotely like it, which is not surprising given how aggressively the company protects its flagship characters. If the tape ever existed, it has remained in the shadows. To understand why this urban legend refuses to die, it helps to step into the history of animation culture. Studios like Disney, Warner Bros., and Fleischer were not only workplaces of disciplined artistry, they were also filled with young men working long hours under heavy corporate oversight. In that environment, prank culture thrived. Animators frequently drew risk sketches, caricatures of bosses, or obscene doodles that never left the studio walls. Some of these have been preserved in art books or auctioned decades later. Disney itself has a documented history of animators creating baldy gag drawings, especially in the 1930s and 1940s. The existence of such prank material makes the idea of a Mickey and Minnie tape sound plausible, at least in spirit. It is not far-fetched to imagine animators taking Disney's most sacred characters and using them in an off-the-clock joke reel. If Betty Boop and Bugs Bunny could be sketched into crude gags by their animators, why not Mickey? Still, plausibility is not proof, and when we examine the tape's supposed existence, the trail vanishes quickly. Nobody has provided a reliable testimony of having handled a reel or tape. The descriptions tend to be vague, often echoing one another without independent detail, which suggests the story is more folklore than fact. What is clear is that no public copy has surfaced. In the internet age, even the most obscure animation fragments, abandoned pencil tests, sensor frames, studio ephemera, tend to leak eventually. That the Mickey and Minnie tape has not points heavily toward it being a story rather than a real object. So, if the tape doesn't exist, why does the rumor stick around? The answer lies in what it represents. Mickey and Minnie Mouse are not just characters, they are crown jewels of Disney, the most protected mascots in modern media. Their romance is sweet and internal but never physical. Their adventures are comic and safe. They are deliberately desexualized, frozen in a perpetual childhood of sorts. That is exactly what makes the idea of a tape so potent as an urban legend. It flips Disney's control upside down. Instead of purity, we have obscenity. Instead of family, we have taboo. The rumor thrives because it breaks the strongest possible cultural boundary. It imagines the most innocent figures in entertainment history, placed in the most inappropriate context imaginable. The tape is less about sexuality than about defilement.